Can I give you a ride home? On a rainy night, I approached a woman standing at the entrance of a convenience store, but I received no response. She is a part-time worker at my company. She ignored my greeting when I first met her, and we have never talked since then. Once again, she ignored me, but the next thing I knew, my name is Edward, turning 40 years old this year. I used to work for a well-known large company, but now I am just a temporary worker at a local factory. Of course, I am doing my best with my current job, but there are times when I get tired of the monotonous tasks. It all started 5 years ago with an accident. I was 35 at the time and worked late nights at the office every day without even having time to consider getting married due to my busy schedule. I used to think that someday those busy days would settle down, but on one particular night I still remember vividly it was an unseasonable heavy rain. When I was crossing the pedestrian crossing with a heavy sigh because I had to do out-of-office sales the next day and I was thinking that I don't even have time to rest, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital with a heavy cast on my leg. The complex fracture in my right leg was caused by being hit by a slipped car. I managed to return to work after being hospitalized for quite a long time, but the environment was terrible. Although I could walk, I could only move slowly. There was no place for me in the department where people mainly worked outside. Then I voluntarily resigned from the company as if I were being kicked out. There was no farewell party, and I left work without saying goodbye to anyone. I never want to experience that loneliness again. After resigning, I struggled to find a new job due to various reasons, including problems with my leg. In the end, I was hired by the current town factory. The main job was simple inspection work staring at the conveyor belt all day. To be honest, I didn't like the atmosphere of the workplace and the way the factory manager interacted with me. Still, I tried to be grateful because at least I had a job. There were 4 of us, including myself, working silently and diligently. During break time, no one spoke and we only nodded to each other every morning. I eventually became accustomed to this environment and before I knew it, there were days where I didn't speak to anyone all day. Of course, there was no one at home and there was no one to talk to at work. Once again, I didn't belong anywhere. However, I didn't feel like trying to change anything at this point. Perhaps I lost my vitality since that accident. On a boring day like that, I finished work and I was heading home in my car as usual, reading a random weekly magazine and buying a can of beer on the way home. That was my routine. I finished my shopping and left the store, but it was pouring rain outside that day. Although the forecast said that it might rain a little, it didn't say that it would rain heavily like this. I would be drenched even if it's just to the car because I couldn't run. As I was wondering if I should wait until the rain stops, I noticed a woman next to me who looked familiar. I believe this person... I think her name was Laura, and she was one of the people in charge of the same location as me in my department. However, I had never talked to her before, and I had never even seen her face properly. Moreover, when I greeted her the first time I met her, she ignored me. She gave off a rather cool impression and would leave work earlier than anyone else and rode her bicycle home. She looked to be around 30 years old, and other than that, I only knew that she was a fellow temporary employee. Can I give you a ride home? I found myself speaking without realizing it. However, it had been a while since I had spoken to someone, and my voice didn't come out smoothly. Whether it was drowned out by the sound of the rain or muffled by my mask, she didn't look over at me. I felt embarrassed for suddenly speaking up, but since I had already started, I thought I would try again. Although she seemed to be absorbed in checking the radar for rain clouds on her phone and kept her head down, I spoke up clearly this time. If she still doesn't respond to me, then that means she's ignoring me. I felt a bit offended, so I was about to leave. But right at that moment, Laura lifted her eyes and our eyes met. For the first time, I saw her expression clearly and realized that she was much younger than I had thought. Well, if you like. I called out to her again, but she just passed me and dashed out into the rain towards the parking lot and then tried to get on her bike. No, it's dangerous. I instinctively shouted and ran over to her. However, she just stared at me in surprise and didn't say anything. Seeing her like that, I was at a loss for words too. Suddenly, she put her hands to her ears and then made an X sign with both hands. You can't hear me. Of course, she couldn't hear that either. We were both soaking wet in the parking lot and just stood there unable to move. I quickly took off my mask and slowly moved my mouth as much as possible. "Can I give you a ride home?" I said while pointing at the car, and she finally seemed to understand. We moved back under the roof together and Laura quickly took out her phone and typed at an incredible speed. "Is it okay?" On the phone she held out to me, it was written so. I nodded emphatically and guided her to my car. We got in the car soaked to the bone. "Where is your home?" But of course there was no response. I took out my phone and slowly typed a message, and then she also typed a message. She lived close to my apartment. I started driving to her house. While the car was enveloped in silence, I was thinking about various things. Laura didn't ignore my greeting, she just didn't hear it. However, my factory manager had never said anything about it. I wondered if other employees knew about this. There were many things on my mind, but I couldn't type while driving, so I decided to drive carefully to drive her home safely for now. When I arrived at her apartment, the rain had stopped and Laura repeatedly thanked me. I took out my phone and started typing. "Can I drive you to work tomorrow morning too?" She was surprised and shook her head as if to say sorry. However, her bike is at the convenience store and it's quite far from here and we were going to the same place anyway. Besides, to be honest, I wanted to know more about her. In the end, we promised to meet and go together to work the next morning and parted ways that day. The next morning, when I pulled up my car in front of her apartment, Laura was already waiting. We exchanged a silent nod and headed towards her workplace. There were many things I wanted to ask her, but I couldn't type on my phone while driving. In the end, we arrived at our workplace in silence and got down to work as usual. As always, there was no conversation with anyone during work, and only the sound of machines echoed. Even during lunch breaks, Laura always disappeared somewhere. On that day, I offered to give her a ride to the convenience store where her bicycle was. I thought I wouldn't be able to ask her anything and we would go back to our normal life, and I was a little bit disappointed. However, no matter where we searched in the parking lot, we couldn't find her bicycle. It must have been stolen. Laura apologized. "It's okay. It's okay," I said, moving my mouth as wide as possible. With this, I began commuting with Laura for a while, but it was difficult to communicate with her while I was driving. Therefore, I decided to write down the questions I wanted to ask her on a piece of paper and pass it to her during the lunch breaks. The next morning, she dutifully wrote her answers on paper. Her name is Laura and she is 29 years old. She seems to have been working at the current workplace since she was 25 years old. It seemed that her hearing loss was acquired and started deteriorating after the age of 20. Now she can hardly hear anything. During lunch breaks, she usually spent time with a stray cat behind the factory. One day, I became curious and peeked behind the factory during lunch break. There, I saw her gently petting the cat with a serene expression that I had never seen before. When she noticed me, she seemed surprised for a moment, but quickly beckoned me over. We ate lunch together and conversed using our phones while petting the stray cats. She used to give off a cold and distant impression, but when she was petting the cat, her expression was very gentle and peaceful. Before long, it became my routine to drive her to and from work and also pet the cats with her during the lunch break. I secretly began practicing sign language. I still remember vividly her surprised expression when I said, "Good morning," to her with my awkward sign language. We began to talk about our past experiences, such as my accident and struggles with finding a place to belong, and she empathized with me to the point where she started shedding tears. However, the reason why she started working at this factory was even more intense than my own. She has been physically weak since she was young and often had to be hospitalized. Despite her health issues, she worked hard in her studies to fit in at school, which eventually led her to become a scholarship student in college. However, her family abandoned her, forcing her out of their home when she turned 18, as they did not approve of her constant hospitalizations and saw her as an adult. The stress of the situation caused her to become ill more frequently. She gradually lost her motivation and sense of belonging, both at school and at home. Despite this, she still managed to graduate from college and began working at a regular company. However, she found herself isolated and distanced from her colleagues, which eventually led her to run away and end up at this local factory. She used to enjoy communicating with others, but now she works here quietly without speaking to anyone. Affected by such days, she gradually decided to distance herself from people, and now her ability to speak has declined. She also dislikes her own voice and has become averse to speaking. That time you spoke to me at the convenience store was the first time I had communicated in months. She writes beautiful letters and hands them to me. As we get to know each other, I have found my place with her in our time together. Eventually, even at work, we started communicating through sign language and written notes. Of course, I was diligent with my work, and it should be a good thing for the workplace to become a little brighter. However, there were people who didn't like the close relationship between me and Laura. One day during lunch break, it had been a year since I started talking with Laura using sign language. As I was receiving my usual sign language lesson from Laura, the factory manager, who rarely interacted with us, approached me. He called me out and said, "It seems like you and Laura have been slacking off from work lately," he said. Of course, that's not true. If anything, she's helped me to work more efficiently. However, the factory manager interrupted me. "I received complaints from 2 other workers." I wondered if they were jealous because we got closer. Of course, I explained the situation. "I accepted both of you despite the fact that you have a bad leg and she can't hear, you know." My manager wouldn't listen. "Decide whether both of you will quit or one of you will resign. It seems like you two, being 2 imperfect beings, have a good relationship. Please convey this message to her." My manager left the room with a smile. When I went back to the lounge, Laura was waiting with a worried look. I wasn't sure if I should tell her the truth, and I told her that I was fired in the end. Then she stood up and suddenly started preparing to leave. In fact, she took off her work clothes and threw them in her locker. I quickly said, "I am the only one who's leaving, okay?" I typed. I wondered if she heard the conversation between the factory manager and me. She finished preparing to leave, completely ready to quit the job, and suddenly approached me and whispered. She said the words slowly and one sound at a time. "Because I belong to you." It was the first time that I heard her voice. It was a soft and muffled voice, but it resonated in my heart. I quickly finished preparing to leave, and we both left the factory, leaving our work clothes behind. As we energetically got into the car, ready to embark on our journey, Laura suddenly grabbed my arm. "Forgot something," she said, and got out of the car. As I was wondering what was going on, she quickly returned with a stray cat from behind the factory, cradling in her arms. "I belong to her too," she said slowly and gently stroked the cat. After losing our jobs, we went to various places, saw different scenery, ate what we wanted, laughed a lot, and talked a lot. She was shy about her voice, but I loved it. And 3 years have passed since the day I first put her in the passenger seat. Since then, I have established a job support organization for people with disabilities. I want the people who cannot find a place to belong to know that there are various options available to them, and there are many people in this world who share the same worries. Laura, who is the vice president, shares the same feeling as me. I used to have no place to belong, neither at work nor at home, but now I always have Laura, who is my place to belong, by my side. Since then, we started dating, got married, and now we work together to run the organization while living together. We will continue to protect such happy days with the 2 of us and 1 cat.